Donald Trump's re-election in the United States means a change to the American diplomatic roster around the world. Here in Canada, Trump has tapped former Michigan Congressman Pete Huckstra to be the next ambassador. He'll be replacing David Cohen, who's been in the job for 3 years, nearly down to the day. Canadian federal and provincial officials, meanwhile, insist they have a familiar relationship with Trump, quickly dismissing his comments this week that Canada should become the 51st state as a joke. Have a listen.
I think President Trump has a great sense of humor, and we have, I think America is a very strong country. Canada is a very strong country. We have fought side by side and lost men and women in wars together. We want to stay strong partners.
The president has a good sense of humor, and, it's a funny comment. I guess he's still upset that, in 1812 we burnt down your White House, and he's holding a grudge after 212 years. But I understand he's a funny guy.
With me now is U.S. Ambassador to Canada, David Cohen. Hi, Ambassador. Pleasure to have you here in studio, if for the last time.
Right. Vashi, it's just a privilege to be back, and I again thank you for inviting me on your air so many times, and it's just been great to be able to have the opportunity to tell the story of the United States-Canada relationship on your show so many times, and really appreciate all the courtesies that you've paid to me.
It's been our pleasure, and we appreciate you making the time that you have for us. Which leads me to get down to business and ask you first, actually, about something that I know has become a headline in this country, and that is primarily around the border that our two countries share. And I wondered if you could speak on behalf of yourself and more widely the Biden administration. Do you have concerns about security at our border?
So the word concerns is a tricky word. Do we have concerns in general about our border, both our north border, that is the Canada border, and our south border, that is the Mexico border? We do. It's something we pay a lot of attention to. In terms of the relative borders, obviously, the most significant issues are the Mexico-United States border, not the Canada-United States border. But there are issues. On the Canada-United States border, we pay a lot of attention to them, and we have identified some areas of concern which we discuss with Canada, and steps have been taken to deal with those concerns. So, just to put it in gross terms, between 2022 and mid-2024, the number of what we would call irregular migration, illegal contacts that United States law enforcement sees in the northern United States from the Canada border doubled in number. So as that was happening, we didn't just wake up one day and say, oh, they're twice as high. It was happening over a period of time, and we engaged in conversations with Canada, tried to identify what the causes of that were, and we took steps. We worked together to take some steps to harden the border, to change some policies, maybe increase some of the law enforcement capacity on both sides of the border. And those numbers have begun to come down pretty aggressively over the last 6 months or so.
So when you talk about the numbers going down in the last 6 months, is it your view that the actions that, and I'll point towards our federal government first, that the federal government here have taken are adequate to address the issue as you see it? And I'm asking, of course, against the backdrop of this increased pressure now that they're facing to do a whole lot more.
Right. So I don't think you ever can eliminate the illegal activities that take place across the border, but you can harden the border. You can take steps. You can try and address those issues. With Canada and the United States, and things that I focus on, you want to have at least a little bit of a balance, because the last thing you want to do is to gum up the movement of trade and goods that cross the border, because this is our #1 trading relationship in the world. It is a trading relationship that is the envy of the world, and the last thing you want to do is to put things in place that make it harder to enable our supply chains to remain integrated, and that would impede job production and GDP production in both Canada and the United States. So a lot of this is looking at the different levers and not necessarily hammering them all the way to one direction or another. You tweak them and you take steps. Some of them are policies, by the way, that you can change policies.
You mentioned the significance of the trading relationship, and I have read already your comments about the potential impact of the tariffs that are being threatened. I wondered, there are some provincial premiers in this country right now advocating for just pursue a bilateral trading relationship, kind of cut Mexico out of things, because there are a host of concerns, particularly where China is concerned, that the Biden administration has expressed and that we've heard also from the incoming Trump administration. If some of those politicians came to you and said, Ambassador, what's your best advice? Do we go it alone with the U.S. or cut Mexico out? What would you tell them?
So, without naming names, I may have heard from a premier or two on this on this subject. And so again, my advice, I can only give advice based on the Biden-Harris administration and what our attitude would, what the United States attitude would be under that administration. I mean, I come from a school of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we have this really incredible agreement in CUSMA. By the way, an agreement that was negotiated by Donald Trump. So I have to give credit where credit is due. And it's also something I mentioned to the Canadians when they're worried about what Donald Trump would want to do with CUSMA. I mean, it is his agreement at the end of the day. And it's an agreement that's working. It works really well. So I think there's a high burden to say, let's break up that agreement and just do a bilateral agreement with Canada and the United States. By the way, some of the things that the premiers are reacting to, for example, maybe Canada's laxer attitude toward Chinese vehicles and importation of Chinese vehicles through Mexico, that can happen whether there's an agreement or not. So if that is a matter of concern, then we should focus on ways to deal with that matter of concern, and just chucking Mexico out of the agreement may not be the best path to take.
My last question is one that I think, at the end of 3 years, I felt like I wanted to ask you, and it's about Canada's place in the world, because I've not only interviewed you a number of times, but hosted a number of panels in which I noticed that one of the main things you get asked about is defense spending. We have interviewed a multitude of American politicians during your time here who have all conveyed that they would like to see Canada spend more on defense and do so more quickly. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you've been more encouraging. You have been less sort of condemning of Canada's record along the last 3 years. But I've also heard from those American politicians and other allies, to be honest, whom we've interviewed, that it has affected the view of Canada insofar as our place at the table. In your view, has it?
So I'll answer the question, but as usual, I have a longer answer than just the answer, which is, to be clear, the United States and I would like Canada to spend more on defense spending. My nuanced view of that is that you can't measure Canada's commitment to defense and investment in defense by reference to any single metric. And so my concern has been with what I think is an unhealthy focus on the percentage of GDP, of its GDP that Canada spends on defense. That is the one metric that too many people tend to focus on. I prefer to focus on the rate of spend, what's been happening with Canada's spend, and the trajectory of spend, even using percent of GDP as the metric. Canada's gone from 1% of GDP, or less than 1% of GDP, when Prime Minister Trudeau was first elected, to 1.36, 1.37% today, to 1.76% projected after the latest defense policy update, to now a committed at least 2% of GDP by 2032. That's the right trajectory. We are pleased with Canada's responsiveness to our requests and to the world's requests to spend more money on defense. But I also think there is no doubt that what you hear from American politicians, from other NATO allies about Canada falling so consistently short against an important metric, without the nuance of everything that follows, that it has hurt Canada's standing in the world from a defense-related perspective, although I think that's coming back. I really do. I think there is an acknowledgement among NATO allies that Canada is stepping up, that the announcements that Minister Blair and Prime Minister Trudeau have made are welcome, and I think they view Canada as being responsive to these concerns, and I think that will begin to bring Canada's standing in the world back, and to do it pretty quickly.
Okay, I have to leave it on that note. I'm out of time. I appreciate your time and have over the years. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Great to be
it.
with you. Thank you.